Welcome to What Matters, Water TV and Podcast, a new forum that looks to address emerging issues and personalities tackling California's water challenges. My name is Charlie Wilson, and I'm privileged to serve as the Executive Director and CEO of the Southern California Water Coalition and your host for this series. Today, we have the opportunity to speak with two of the most prominent leaders at the state level in California water to discuss drought, resiliency, and the role the state plays in California water. With us today is Joaquin Esquivel, the chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. He has regulatory responsibility for protecting the water quality, balancing competing demands on our water resources, and attempts to resolve decades-long water disputes. Also with us is Karla Nemeth, the director of the California Department of Water Resources, where she is responsible for managing and protecting California's water resources, working with other agencies in order to benefit the state's people and to protect, restore, and enhance the natural and human environments. Stay with us for What Matters. Well, Joaquin Esquivel was appointed to the State Water Resources Control Board by Governor Jerry Brown in 2017, was designated by Governor Gavin Newsom to chair this august body in February of 2019. And I'm happy to say Joaquin was just reappointed by Governor Newsom for a second term as Water Board Chair. Joaquin, congratulations on your reappointment. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you, Charlie. Really appreciate this opportunity to have a discussion.
Well, I have to say as we open, but you have got this awesome responsibility at the State Water Board. And as we described in our initial opening, you have the regulatory responsibility, and nobody really knows this, for protecting the water quality for, what is it, so like 1.6 million acres of lakes, 1.3 million acres of bays and estuaries, 211,000 miles of rivers and streams, and never forget the 1,100 miles of exquisite California coastline. And that doesn't even come close to mentioning the nearly 40 million people who rely on you for safe, clean drinking water. What's it like to sort through and prioritize all of those issues? And that just seems awesome to me.
Yeah, it's humbling. I'll say that. And I come to this position at the board knowing that there has been an incredible legacy of leadership in the state of California. You look at our systems and just our natural resources, the uniqueness of our biodiversity, the incredible landscapes that we have here, and the responsibility to continue to improve the quality of our waters. We're inheriting a system ultimately that we're reconciling in many ways. You look at the last 200 years of development, and in some ways they've very much removed some of the ecosystem services and ways in which groundwater resources were replenished, floodplains were activated, and this system of water and its distribution, the hydrology, the variability across the state that was managed for millennia by California's indigenous and Native American tribes is it's a lot. It can both inheriting that, reconciling it, knowing that we have a lot of challenges, that we've made incredible investments that allow 40 million Californians to be here, but we have a water system that was built for a century, the 20th century, and we find ourselves here with a 21st century climate crisis and a lot of stresses on these systems, again, that we've inherited. They create a lot of wealth that fuel our fifth largest economy here in the world, but we're going to need to continue to think differently about our systems and improve the way we view the ecologies, the natural ecosystems that our economies are based on top of, and really start to leverage 21st century advancements and remote sensing and data to make us better decision makers. And I think it's really the need to be better decision makers and the pressing urgency that climate change creates that for me kind of creates one of the more important lenses, if you will, to my work, where the board does have incredible responsibility. And with the Division of Drinking Water having been added just here, 6 years ago to the board, adds another dimension as we now also regulate water quality at the tap. So that ability to connect the quality of our waters coming off our watersheds, which are incredibly stressed right now because of wildfire and the quality impacts there in the changing landscape, in the need to better manage at that level, being able to integrate an understanding of that, how we best do it as water moves through our rivers onto our land, is used for agriculture, importantly, feeds the state and the nation, and moves into our cities. And the need to better account for the ways that we protect water quality and beneficial use throughout that entire system, not just on the quality side, but the quantity as well, as you administer water rights. And then again, connecting it to even drinking water, provides us an opportunity to really take a systems approach to the way we view or regulate, particularly here at the board, our water resources, and in ways that really start to maximize the resource in ways that we have been here in the state by investing in water recycling, investing further in stormwater capture, starting to recharge our groundwater aquifers. But the weight of it all is pretty significant, certainly. And so I take it all with a great amount of humility, but knowing that we have a lot of opportunity.
So it's never too much to handle. And I know you kind of exemplify, California, as you described, we have this really rich, vibrant tradition. And frankly, over the last 200 plus years, sort of how our water systems developed in what has been a very arid place. And we'd like to say, one of the really great things about California, it's really big, we're really diverse, which is part of that texture and part of the opportunity. Yeah, that flip side is, we're really big, we're really diverse. And I know from our perspective in Southern California, people don't really always realize, like other parts of the state, sort of exactly where does that water come from? What does it mean? What that value proposition is? They tend to see more of the problem areas. And then they see, in your case, they see things like, oh, he's the regulator. Oh, nobody wants to be regulated unless you're the one that's making sure that obviously you have clean drinking water, which becomes really important. I'm curious, as you sort of, as you approach your decision making, because I know for a long time, it's Sacramento based, you got kind of that heavy emphasis in and around Sacramento. How is it that you go about sort of looking outside and making sure that you do have a perspective of that diversity that the state holds?
By listening, and it's not always easy to listen. I'll just say it takes work. Not unlike we put a lot of emphasis on public speaking. Many hours. Frustration, anxiety around how best to speak publicly, but to really listen is incredibly important. I found that certainly in my time at the board. Now as chair, having to run meetings twice a month where that generate significant public comment. I found that it is important to really try to listen. We thankfully at the board have an acknowledgement of the great variability in the state, because you look at Port Cologne 50 years ago now, modeled to the Clean Water Act, the federal Clean Water Act, and again, a proud tradition in the state of leading, but importantly acknowledged that we have 9 regional water quality control boards because the hydrology across the state is so varied. We need local, for as much as state control or, state, and I want to acknowledge, particularly it seems in these days, there's a lot of voice and tension given to, regulatory agencies being antithetical to economies or economic success, and that you have an either or in the space. But I think California has shown that you can have both. That importantly, clean water and clean air can be the basis of our modern economies, have to be the basis of our modern economies. And it's actually the balance in the continuum of decision making from the local to the state and the federal level that brings success. And when you can really best leverage and align what is the need for local leadership. Because I think that California, again, there acknowledges it with even the way we've structured the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, where you have incredible local control, importantly, because you want local leadership in the long term. You can't replace, we're too big of a state, there's too many of us, you can't replace good decision-making at the local level up in Sacramento. It has to, again, be a continuum. And it is based off of needing to listen, but also to acknowledge that state action is needed. You look at the State Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and you have an incredible amount of local control because you need that local leadership at the local level to be making decisions that you can't just replicate up in Sacramento. But importantly, it is that continuum of decision making from the local, state, and federal levels that actually make success in our watersheds. And you look at the setting of maximum contaminant limits in drinking water, and that's something that you want resources at the state level to be able to do for us, for all of our agencies. If it was left to each county to try to set their own limits to do that work, we wouldn't be able to have the success we have in protecting communities and drinking water in the face of very challenging circumstances.
Well, one of the great advantages that you had by being appointed by one governor and then transitioning to the new governor and kind of seeing that evolution and the style difference between the two. One of the real advantages, I think, when Governor Newsom came to office was really kind of taking what Governor Brown had done and then sort of going to that next level. And that was in the development of a very comprehensive roadmap that he referred to as the water resiliency portfolio, climate resiliency portfolio, sort of how that fits in. And I know you played an integral part of that. A question I'd want to ask of you is, what does water resiliency mean to you? And then how do you take that into your job as chair of the water board?
Thanks. It's so important to be able to really define words like resiliency because we use it so much. And for me, I think of, in biology, when you look at the resiliency, say, of ecosystems, it's their ability to suffer a shock. That shock may be a drought, it may be a flood, it's some circumstance that is here, some outside the norm of what or the stasis that system may have. And for us on a drinking water system level, say, it's the ability to serve clean and safe drinking water. That shock may be an economic downturn. It may be a new maximum contaminant limit as we understand the emerging threats. I think of harmful algal blooms, I think of PFAS. Those can all be shocks to what is otherwise the stability of a drinking water system or our systems generally. And so so with climate change, we know, and the benefit here of being in California is when you look at our systems and those shocks of drought and flood are ones that we've always had to contend with. We have a very highly variable system in the state, far more variable precipitation hydrology wise than any other state in the nation. And that's meant our systems have accounted for those dry times to take advantage of flood and manage it. But we know we're going to have to do a lot more of that. And so, resiliency ultimately is the ability to bridge then those extreme events and carry on ecosystem functions in the case of ecosystems, or here, the ability to continue to deliver clean drinking water, continue to manage sanitation and waste, and manage our water resources across the extreme of the continuum of extremes that we know we're going to continue to experience.
Well, that's a great segue, and we're in one of those extremes, and we kind of remiss if we didn't touch on, what was referred to as the current drought or the extended drought. It's clearly very dry this year, and I know you have been literally up and down the state, very highly sought after by the news media. How are we managing through the existing, I'll call it existing dry spell, and what kind of steps is the state looking to take to help kind of get through this year and then kind of you're planning for that next cycle and the investments that have to be made?
Always hard to evaluate your job from the inside as you're doing it. But I would say we've done well insofar as California has weathered previous droughts. You just look at our most recent drought, and Californians were able to pull through those dry conditions. But we can't rest on the success of our management from prior droughts. And what you see from each one of those droughts is an advancement of policy, of technical understanding, of just the discussion around the preparation for future drought, and has spurred investments in water recycling. You think of the Prop 1 bond dollars in the last drought; those investments are making a difference now. And I know that I will be sensitive here and acknowledge that storage dollars from Prop 1 have not gone out. These were for larger storage projects that themselves are still mid-process and being developed. But we know that storage at that watershed scale, 21st century, the right sort of projects that have the right balance are important, but so are the ones at a smaller scale. And importantly, the bond invested in water recycling, stormwater capture, groundwater cleanup, and further maximizing those supplies, which we know in Southern California are often contaminated because of legacy challenges and could be better resources if we have dollars, and we did. And those dollars are making a difference now in those projects, water recycling projects, stormwater projects. But we're going to need to do a lot more. And so I feel we've done well enough during this period. We're going to need to prepare for continued dry conditions. If things remain dry this winter, and the State Water Project delivers a 0% allocation, that's going to have consequences in Southern California. And getting a hold of those now, understanding those, and I know the director of the Department of Water Resources, my great colleague, Karla Nemeth, has been doing just that work these last months, and just better first making sure that our modeling can better account for this hydrology we're now in. Part of our challenge this year has been, as we've managed through this drought, was the incredible dryness that we did not anticipate. And it meant that planners for our major projects were off by about 1 million acre feet of water. And 1 million acre feet is enough to sustain nearly 2 million homes for a year. It's not an insignificant amount, but it's because of climate change and the fact actually that we're so close to our last drought, and that we've seen this just intense aridification of our watersheds. There's something known as a runoff efficiency that is calculated, which is basically what percentage of rain and snow makes it into the rivers and then our reservoirs. In usually our traditional climate, the climate that we were used to in the 20th century, it fluctuates, but it was around, say, 60%. This year, we saw a runoff efficiency of about 20%, meaning, that much less of our precipitation even made it into our reservoirs to manage, to use, to extend. And it's concerning. It means that we need to continue to prepare for what is obviously an arid and trendingly arid climate, and also be making the investments that again help us bridge these extremes. And so this summer has been challenging, certainly for communities in the Russian River watershed. I think of other places up and down the state, certainly on the North Coast, but also up in the Klamath Basin, with the Scott and the Shasta, where the board has done work. It has not been an easy summer, and communities in the Russian River watershed, some have been conserving mandatorily 30-40% of their usage. And so importantly, you see Californians at the local level responding. And I think importantly, we've seen California respond generally. Los Angeles, although I know the recent conservation numbers, I think have, pretty much, its water usage is as it was in 2020. We haven't seen the 15% reduction, at least off of July numbers. In that, important to remember as well, though, that per capita, Southern California is still doing better in their water usage than many Northern California communities, which isn't to say that, again, we rest on our laurels or rest on previous successes here in managing through drought, but that there's context. And importantly, we have a history and response here in the state of being able to manage through, but we're going to have to get serious here as we enter another dry winter on, not just conservation, but importantly in the investments we need to make. Right. It's not all about just any one tool in the toolbox. The water resiliency portfolio and our approach really is about a systems approach, and really thinking about how we also expand that pie as we also ensure conservation is there during droughts, but also in the long term with efficiency.
Well, that may have been one of those really good news things, right? We had unprecedented investment opportunities with state and federal revenues this year. So there is, projects and there are things that are in that pipeline. But one of the the really cool sort of neat things I found about you is that, I know you love big data, new technology and technology solutions. Anybody brave enough to rewire their own house and turn up their own system, okay, that dude understands data and understands how to use data. Where do you see big data and those technological solutions as part of this resiliency portfolio? Do you see opportunity with that? Or is it just kind of old fashioned, dig the trench, put it in the pipeline, develop the resource? How do they work together?
Yeah, they importantly, thank you, Charlie. They work together. It is bringing. It's not about rejecting everything that's come before and having nothing but the new shiny out there. But with remote sensing, with an ability to I think of the investments that water agencies are making in better censoring out their systems, where before leaks even spring up in a street and cause loss, being able to monitor and know that there's a pressure difference and have systems and importantly machines here that we can leverage and use for better decision making. And again, at the local level, there's tremendous opportunity to continue to innovate the way systems are being run. And here at the state level, importantly, our regulatory programs, these 50-year-old programs, are needing that same sort of rethink, the same sort of investment made into their fundamental decision making, which means an interest in their systems, their data systems, and the information that supports the decision making. For us at the board, we have something, there's so much, the bureaucracy I know can seem exhausting for some folks, but there's something known as the 303D list. It's a list of all of our impaired water bodies. It's required by the Clean Water Act. We do it here in the state, but what it does is it takes samples that are sometimes part of permits, or maybe a citizen, a community scientist is out there and gathered some data, about a particular, analyte in a water body. Maybe it's tied to a harmful algal bloom, whatever it may be. It all makes its way into our central water quality database system. And from there, it needs to be turned into lines of evidence for decisions as to, is this water body impaired then? Do we have evidence to show that it's not meeting its limits for certain metals or pollutants? And it was a very time intensive. It took years to get through each cycle, and it's because people just had paper essentially, and maybe a spreadsheet here and there. But what has happened at the board over the last 5 years is we've invested in the systems approach behind that. And now those lines of those decision making and lines of code, lines of evidence, et cetera, that are all getting matched up, millions are now automated and are improving the way that we can process that list, that that analysis of what water bodies are impaired in the state. What is the data that we have? And we see nothing but an exponential growth in that data. So it's an example of real, world example of how making some investments in these data systems can really up the computational, processes that are happening, but importantly, offload it from staff, lean on the data systems, and then bring that decision making into just another space, maximize, as popular word in water management, the beneficial use of just even what are, again, permit requirements. Sometimes you're a discharger and you're having to sample, and those samples make their way into here, an ability for us to just even better analyze and understand the challenges we have on the water quality front.
I got to ask you this before we go, because time flies when we're doing this kind of a conversation. I could literally sit, just kind of pick your brain most all day, but I hear this tremendous passion in your voice for what you do. And I have to ask, because I don't know many people that, as a young kid said, hey, one day I'm going to work in the water. I want to be a water regulator. How did you end up in water? And was this something you planned, something you just found? But I mean, clearly you have to have a passion for it when you come to the table. Where does that come from with you?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. It is, I certainly didn't plan to be chair of the water board. There was actually no career sort of plan or plot that necessarily got me here. And actually, but I look at my past and I look at my upbringing in the Eastern Coachella Valley, going to the Salton Sea as a youth, often, and knowing in the Eastern Coachella Valley and seeing the disparities in my community, where I was fortunate. My dad was a teacher, but my grandparents were farm workers, and I was still very aware of how close we were to the reality of poverty that millions of Californians still live in, and the challenges that I think we have all generationally here when it comes to just, the amazing things that we've inherited, but the way that they're challenged, by climate change, by continued inequities that we still, we see, the fact that race is so determinative of the access to clean water, clean air, or economic opportunities. And so, I was very fortunate, and I went to UC Santa Barbara. I had some a wayward time, a few wayward years, I think, importantly for myself. Went to community college, importantly, went to College of the Desert, and had a year there at Orange Coast. And in that time, I came out, I found, I figured out who I was, and it was an important part of my development, I guess you can say, as a person, and led me to really be passionate about just change and communities, and led me to be an English major at UC Santa Barbara, where literature for me was just so critically, just such a powerful tool and window into previous times that we're dealing with similar challenges. I think of the transcendentalists, Henry David Thoreau, certainly, but Emerson, importantly, in the 1830s and 40s, where tremendous change was happening, development of the land, the landscape, and there were tensions and questions about what it meant. And anyway, I felt very connected to that. And it wasn't until I saw a flyer for the University of California's Washington, D.C. program that I made my way then to D.C. And I interned at Senator Boxer's office. I thought I was going to teach. I thought that I would continue on and literature would be my passion, but was fortunate to be provided an opportunity in the senator's office. I thought it would just be a year or two, turned into 8.5 years. And in that time, agriculture, water, Native American issues, and oceans became my legislative portfolio that I handled for the senator, and got to experience incredibly the difference that California ag is to the rest of the nation. All of our specialty crops, all the ways in which I feel very proud to be even there connected. For if it were not but for agriculture, I would not be here. My grandfather was a bracero, came over in a time when agricultural workers were being needed. Anyway, hopefully that makes some sense. It was a roundabout, but
I get it, and I'm going to just share with you, because now I understand we're both fellow pirates from OCC, and as the chair of a regulatory body, I was taught by my water polo coach there, like, don't mind that if I'm yelling at you every day. You need to care when I stop yelling at you, because that means I'm not paying attention anymore. And so long as people are yelling at you, Mr. Chairman, we know they're paying attention, which means they're engaged in the important water issues as we go forward. So I try to find something positive in all of that. But Joaquin, thank you for taking time to be with us. We very much appreciate it. And we'll look to engage you more on these important issues as you come, they come before you and you have to make important decisions. We're going to try to help educate so we can advocate for good public policy for the state of California. Thanks so much.
Thank you as well. Really appreciate this time.
Welcome back. Next up is Karla Nemeth. Karla was appointed the director of the California Department of Water Resources by then Governor Jerry Brown back in 2018. She was reappointed by Governor Gavin Newsom in 2019. So again, we've got somebody that has served two different governors. The Department of Water Resources operates and maintains the California State Water Project, manages floodwaters, monitors dam safety, conducts habitat restoration, and provides technical assistance and funding for projects for local water needs. That's a full portfolio. Karla, thanks for being with us and welcome.
You bet. Thank you so much for having me, Charlie. And you've got a great podcast voice, I just got to say.
Well, I've got the face for podcast, Karla. Thanks very much for that. I have to start just because it's, splashed over every newspaper headline and the TV. We have to start, I guess, with the drought, the current drought. I mean, does this dry cycle differ to you from others? I mean, you're part of the same drought or a new drought? And how does that really change the way we approach water management in the state?
Yeah, it definitely differs. And I think you're right. I think we are starting to understand the evidence that points to this drought as being probably part of the most recent drought, with a couple of wet years, punctuating. Maybe the tweener years were wet years. But we do have a sense that all these antecedent dry conditions that really manifested this year in particular in very new ways relative to how we translate hydrology into water supply, that those were put in place in the previous drought. And so what the way I think about it, Charlie, is, California hydrology is, goes like this. We're so variable. We're going to continue to be very variable. But there are some very distinct background trends that are only going like this. And so our challenge is, how do we layer on that variability with these trends that are really heading in pretty much one direction? And that's ambient temperature. It's, overnight low temperature, high temperature. How do we put all those things together and anticipate aspects of drought into the future so we can get ahead and manage? And so this one definitely feels different from what happened in California, even in the depths of 2014, 2015. And that was really, we had 70% snowpack April 1st. April 1st is this storied date in water management in California, where we, take our umpteenth trip up into the Sierra and we measure the snowpack and the water content of that snowpack, and we kind of call it, a week after we process all that stuff. But for all practical purposes, we call the water year, in that time frame. But what happened between April 1st and May 31st was unprecedented. We went from 70% average snowpack to almost nothing. And that has never happened before, that steep drop off. So we had historically poor runoff conditions this year that we'd never experienced late in the season for water management decisions. That's very different from what we had last year.
Well, if you get to zero allocation, that's a tough year.
Yeah,
and it's tough all the way across. But it strikes me that this responsibility that you have, and in the introduction, I mean, you cover a lot of ground, and it can feel, if it's a wet year, it's going to be tough because we got to manage floods, and if it's a dry year, it's a tough year because we don't have any water to move. But I've always found you to be really optimistic about the outlook, about California and about California water. What is it that you bring to the table? What is it that makes you optimistic?
Well, so this is, here's what I think. I think that, water is complicated in California, not just because of our, variable hydrology, but we have variable human institutions that all manage it together. And water is very much managed at the local level in California. And so as we make progress on issues, it tends to be kind of a slow roll. And so we've seen these climate challenges out on the horizon. And at first they were way off in the distance, and now they're really right in front of us, like right in front of us. And so I'm optimistic because I think in our heart of hearts, we know what to do. And as water professionals in California, and we got to get connected with ourselves as problem solvers, as frankly, as risk takers in terms of looking at the future and meeting the future. And we have an incredible history of doing that in California as water managers. And, maybe we've gotten a little, just a little bit too into our conflicts, and that suddenly seem a little less important when you think about the real big picture. So for that reason, I am optimistic. We're moving like crazy right now. Everything seems very urgent, and that's a good thing because it gives us a good kick. And I have a lot of confidence in the leadership that's vested, in lots of different parts of California. And Charlie, I think what's really cool about it is we also have more diversity now than we've ever had in California water management. And we've got this, surging millennial group that is ready for challenges, that really understands equity issues, and they're ready to tackle them. So I think we're going to make incredible strides to prepare California for the climate future. And that climate future is going to be more inclusive. And we're ready for that, and we can do it.
Well, you speak to that historic perspective, and I completely get that, right? It seems at some point, in this utility business, until you've spent 25 or 30 years, you really don't know anything.
Yeah.
And, just about the time you learn something, it's time to retire and go on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but, that historic perspective that, we literally stand on the shoulders of people that
Absolutely.
came before us and some really bold decisions, or we wouldn't have the infrastructure in place that we have today. And that was huge risk. From your perspective, how do you see that historic approach to water resiliency and drought cycles? Because you're right. It used to be just sort of extract and use, and then sort of we would dump. And now it's really fully integrated.
Yes.
And that was one of the things actually that struck me when Governor Newsom came to office. The one thing he sort of added to the Brown legacy was this resiliency portfolio, really looking at it as a full portfolio, not just all the above, but what does it mean for resiliency and going through that? But your perspective, having been in those kind of different arenas, how do you see that resiliency and drought cycles? Is it really integrated, or is it something that is going to be brand new into the future?
No, I think it is about integration. And I think that all of this is pushing this towards that in a much more intense way. And, a big part of that is, the last drought, California finally decided it was time to manage groundwater. And that was this huge missing component of our management cycle. So there's the hydrologic cycle, and, we manage all these pieces. We have such a managed system. But we have this one missing piece, right? And now we've got it. And so, even at the department, what's really incredible about how much this drought is pushing us is, we have our integrated water management group, now working very intensely with our groundwater management group, which is better connected to, holy cow, look what just happened with the State Water Project, and look what's happened with forecasting. So how do we take the forecasting improvements and make sure that it's not just informing State Water Project, which was a very traditional connection. It also happened to help, the Water Board deal with some of their watershed management, and others who aren't part of the State Water Project. But now we're taking a look at that information and saying, gosh, it's got to populate our approach to Sigma. It's got to populate our approach to integrated water management, where the department is very much connected with local agencies. And I think the department can play a really important role in being more of a kind of a really amping up its role as a neutral provider of climate information. What does it mean, and how do we pull these new physical components into the mix, like dry soils and these things that we now know in kind of a painful way exactly how much that is going to affect our decision making. So we're definitely driving towards integration. And one of the things that I have been thinking about as a department director, so I've got about 3,800 people at the department. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is, are we a department that is really moving towards climate and flood and drought? And that's how we organize ourselves. We're kind of this great accretion of, policy and funding and budget that comes to the department, and we build up these programs. And let me tell you, the work of breaking down silos within a department is never, ever, ever done. It's constant, and it's part of human institutions. And so, I would say, Charlie, if it weren't for, coming back after COVID and all those challenges, and then sort of future of work, what does it mean to have a teleworking staff, and where does it work task oriented? Where does it work less well in terms of brainstorming, creativity? If we weren't sorting through that institutional transition at the moment, I think, I would be a little bit more, I'd be leaning in even harder to this idea of climate, flood, drought. That's who we are, and we're heading there, and we're starting to make some institutional adjustments so that in a couple years from now, when we've got like the human capacity as an organization to absorb more change, we're going to be ready, because that's our future. That's what our shop is going to look like in the future, because that's what's happening around us. And we have to adapt. We have to have an organizational structure and culture that responds to those external challenges. Now, you'll get a kick out of this. We're moving into a new office building. So I've got this, corner office in a building from the 60s, and on the side of the building, there's this great design on the side of the building that is actually, modeled after a computer punch card. That's the design, because that's what was the future in the 60s. And it was this avant-garde, great building. There's a lot of storied decisions that happened in this wood paneled office. And as I was moving all my stuff out of there, let me tell you, I don't know if I need even one set of bookends that are made from giant bolts of, water infrastructure, but I had no fewer than 6, in the office that were, generated over the years. And I pulled it all down, and I had these hardbound books of the California Water Plan, embossed with the director's seal. And there's just so much history there about, how the department started, what it was meant to do. And it's awesome. And all those directors were remarkable for looking into the future and preparing the organization to respond to that future. It's a huge honor to be making this amazing transition at this, moment in time, and setting ourselves up as DWR to be good partners and really meet this challenge. It's a fantastic job.
Well, it is quite the legacy that you get to build on. And
oh, yeah.
while lots of the public likes to, think that, government employees are just those black-hatted people, maybe the black hat and a black trench coat, just live the part for a while as you walk through and change. But we're going to change, people. We're going to change. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, and part of what you kind of need to do, I think, is like, imagine what it was like, back in that time. And that's why I made that point about the building with the computer card. I mean, it was a very different, sort of ethos. And, long after I'm gone, my hope is that, 4 or 5 directors down the road, they'll be like, what was she thinking about? And this was top of mind. And there was a moment of great change. And, there's so much to stand on, when you're a bridge between the past and looking towards the future.
Well, and that brings up a really good next question. I mean, you work for 2 very different personalities and 2 governors. One absolutely steeped in California history. I mean, family and personally legacy, right? He was there when those punch cards were made. Yeah. And now you've got a different governor with a very different personality, a very different leadership style. What do you learn from people like that you've worked with or worked for that helps you in meeting these competing interests?
Yeah, so I'm a policy person, but Charlie, I'm also kind of a good government junkie. A couple of things. I would say when I started with Brown, I was a policy advisor, and he had his methods that, at first are a little, they're always intimidating. At first they're scary, and then you outgrow the scary, and it just is what it is. And you learn to enjoy getting put on the spot and getting quizzed on all kinds of topics, because it forces you to think about your own value system and how you communicate, your own value system. And for me, that has been so helpful in working with the diverse parts of California. I mean, California is such a complex state across the board, and water is just, one of those many complex things. But people are bringing to the table, there's a lot of water people in California who have that same steeped history as Governor Brown. And so he really taught me how to engage with that, how to respect that, and how to reflect on it, and then think about sort of the art of the possible to point us towards the future. Governor Newsom, very different approach in a lot of ways, and I think that's that's really evident in the water resilience portfolio, where it really is about there's all these things we need to be doing, and the real trick of that, if you will, is how you integrate all of these things. And so I would just say an observation that was partly, these governors stepping into certain situations. So Governor Brown came in and it was like record deficit. Is California governable? That was the, question du jour, right? And so here was this person, right time, with, frugality at his core, right?
So some would say very cheap.
Yes.
But frugal is good.
We all wore many, many hats in the Brown administration, and we really needed to right the ship in certain ways. And that really set, I think, a good foundation for Governor Newsom to come in, who's a very broad thinker about all of these components. His instincts are very inclusive. He also, like Brown, really embraces the new ideas, and he has this real opportunity to make some incredible progress on how we integrate all the things that we're doing. And so that, for me, is with Brown, I spent a lot of time in a policy chair. Towards the end of that, I had 1 year, working on top of this institution. A funny story, a previous director who shall remain nameless, one of the things he used to tell me when I was in a policy chair, he would say, "Karla, some days I feel like I'm up here and you may think I run DWR, but I pick up the phone and it's like a cord, the cord's unplugged from the phone, right? I think I'm asking for these things, but it's really hard to get them." And so now I'm in this role with Governor Newsom where I'm, atop this organization that where I have a tremendous amount of support from this governor to really push and really integrate the Department of Water Resources, and then turn around and work so intensely with our partners, the Water Resources Control Board, with our partners at the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and our partners at the Department of Food and Ag. We have our sort of tried and true water partners, but Governor Newsom and the resilience portfolio is so indicative of his value of integrated government. That is just, it's been a really important experience for me to understand that as a directive. And for me, in my role, and what's so good about, being in the job I am right now, is I can do that at the department. And my big message for the department is we got to break down our internal silos. We got to get our own shop in order so that we can turn around and be better partners with state agencies to realize this broader vision. And that's very much a Newsom kind of approach.
Those are great, valuable lessons to put into your portfolio. So, Karla, it sounds like you've had two tremendous mentors and lots of people that have sort of formulated what it is, in your leadership style. But I got to turn it personally, because it's one thing to talk about policy, it's one thing to talk about the department, and those are tremendous things. But it's individuals like you that, as you described, you have to steer the ship. And I just got to ask, it's a little bird, because we do our research here. A little bird told me that you're quite passionate about cooking. And so I have to ask you this question. It's like, so what are your cooking tastes, and what do they tell us about your leadership style and breaking down silos in that department?
Okay. Well, so I do love to cook, and I love food. So I don't know, you can't be a good cook unless you really love food. I would say I'm also Italian. And that's part of my family heritage that I identify most with. So I bring a lot of passion, I think, when I'm cooking. And I also, and maybe this probably bugs people, one of the things I love about Italian food is I love the big table, family style, all kinds of different dishes, and you get to try everything. And one of my best meals was with some friends in Milan, and we sat at the table. We sat down at noon, And we had a few breaks and walked around a little bit in between, but we didn't finish until 8 p.m. And we had a little bit of everything. And so, maybe I'm someone who's also pretty infamous for having a pretty messy desk. And I've got, in my office, this giant, floor to ceiling, org chart, because we're 3,800 people. So that's a lot of people. And, maybe that is reflected in how I like to cook, which is for a lot of people, a lot of different things, and sort of my Italian heritage, and that sort of, passion for all kinds of flavors, and the creativity of cooking kind of feeds into how I approach my role at the department. And we're a pretty hierarchical organization, just as a general matter, and because we have to be when we're kind of this no-fail business. We've got this really important role to play. But there's so many great ideas within the organization, and for me, as a leader of a public organization, some of my best days are when I'm introduced to younger people who are coming to the table with their own set of passion, and being in a position to connect their passion, their talent, and their expertise to the mission of the department, so that Californians can benefit from that, is just one of the absolute best parts of my job.
Well, then I have to finish with this. I mean, that it explains so much of the Bay Delta hearing process and public engagement. I can't tell you. It's a long, complicated process, and everybody's got to talk, and they're all very passionate about it.
Yes.
But nobody grows up saying, as a junior high schooler, hey, one day I want to be a water policy manager.
Yep.
How did you end up in water policy, and what drives your interest and energy in this subject?
Well, so I'm kind of a believer in, these little seeds get planted, and some of them take a longer time to really, germinate and sprout. And so I can kind of trace it back to a couple of key things. One, I'm a Southern Californian. I was born and raised in San Diego, and my dad was a civil engineer. And so I always sort of knew about engineering. We took these. He was also very passionate about the California's environment. He was an East Coast transplant, and he fell in love with San Diego Bay and then the Sierra Nevada. So I spent all my time, really moving between those two places. We didn't take a family trip to Hawaii. Why would we go to Hawaii when we've got this lovely coast? Was his thing. And so I really had this sense from him about engineering and these mighty rivers in California. And then I would say, and I didn't fully appreciate that until I got a little bit older and was really thinking about the intersection of politics and policy, and just those two interests. As you know, California water is really about we have a state that is audacious in its environmental wonders, and we have a state that has been audacious in its management of California water. And it's really connecting those two things, honoring those two things. And that's really what stoked my passion. I'd say maybe the last thing is I'm a big John McPhee fan. I don't know if you've ever read any of his books. He's a terrific essayist. And he wrote this wonderful book, Encounters with the Archdruid. And part of that is a rafting trip he took down the Colorado with Floyd Dominy and David Brower. So it was kind of this fulcrum. And, what is it when you have these tremendous personalities, that have such very different worldviews? And it was just such an incredible metaphor going down the river about, how humans relate to their environment, how they relate to what's the relationship of humans to their environment, and how that really shapes our landscape. And he's such a wonderful writer that just, all these years later really still resonates with me. And I think sometimes I think, when my dad passed away before I became the department director, and I just think, how amazing would that have been to just pick up the phone and say, guess what? Guess what I've been able to do. And it's just such an honor. It's just so humbling to be in this, sort of long line of California leaders, and to realize that I'm really only as good as the people around me, both stakeholders, and that's such a limiting word, but just all the good people that are working in California Water, and then all the good people who are working at the organization. And I think it's really all those things, Charlie, that kind of led me to well, in a lot of ways, this really does make sense for me and all of my passion. And as I said, at the end of the day, I'm really a good government junkie. So in a lot of ways, I found my niche in some ways, being the head of DWR at such an important time in our history and in California, in our history of water management. And I'm ever optimistic that we will rise to the occasion. It's in us, it's in our DNA, to make tough choices, to look towards the future, and we're gonna get it done. We're gonna have a climate resilient California for sure.
Well, Karla, we are lucky to have you, and lucky to have somebody with your background and your passion. I want to thank you for taking time to be with us today. This was tremendous. Thank you so much.
Likewise, Charlie, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on What Matters Water, TV, and Podcast. If you like today's discussion, go to wherever you download your podcasts and give us that 5-star rating. That'll help us build our presence in this new world and on this new format. If you're interested in helping sponsor this program, also please reach out to us at socalwater.org and send us a message. We'd love to have you as part of our broadcast. And as we close today's show, I leave you with this challenge. Be a part of the conversation. Be a part of the solution. At the Southern California Water Coalition, we educate to advocate. So as public policy leaders have difficult choices, we help them make informed decisions. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you again next time on What Matters Water, TV, and Podcast.